The Idaho Dispatch. It is June 16th, 2025. I apologize. We went live for about 2 seconds and I realized the Facebook was not kicking on, which is where we have most of our followers. In fact, if you'll bear with me for just a second, let me go on Facebook and let people know where they can watch. For some reason, there's an issue on Facebook's end. It's not letting us go live on there, at least right now. The first time we did an episode of Dispatch Direct, which this is episode 2, so the first one we did, it worked fine. But for whatever reason, Facebook is saying that they're it's the feature is not working, I think is what the error message was. So we're gonna roll forward regardless. I'll let people know on Facebook here real quick. Uh, okay, so just letting people know they can jump on here and watch if they would like to. So today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the No Kings protests, a little mostly about what happened here in Idaho, kind of our direct experience with the two protests and the one counter protest that we went to, as well as kind of nationwide what we heard. And I didn't dig in too much to what was going on across the country. I do know, obviously, as some of you do, that there was the shooting in Minnesota, and it sounds like the suspect has been caught. I don't, they said it was politically motivated. It appears to be. There was a hit list of some kind, all that kind of stuff. There's some really weird, kind of contradictory information in there. Like one of the people on the hit list was already someone who had passed away. So maybe the hit list is really old. I don't really know. Lots of details out of with the shooting in Minnesota, but certainly not a good thing when we start having targeted assassinations. In fact, I saw in, I believe, Colorado, they were going to pull down. I don't know if they were doing it for everybody or just for elected officials, but they were pulling down the full addresses of elected officials. So, and we have that same thing here in Idaho, where not only is every donor tracked by their full address, but lawmakers, you can find their C1 paperwork typically, and you're going to find a lawmaker I should say a candidate's address. Full address is almost always listed on paperwork somewhere in in the legislature. So that's obviously I think very concerning for a lot of people. I don't know that. I mean, there's some questions about whether or not even donors' full addresses need to be listed on the Secretary of State's website. So, but the voter rolls contain that full information. So, I mean, it's all publicly accessible on some level. So, that was kind of happening just, I think it may have happened while we were at the Driggs No Kings protest, but I didn't hear about it because we basically got up, got ready, and took off to Driggs to go to the No Kings protest. So, what was our experience like for the No Kings protest? It was interesting. It was hot, first of all. So we went up to Driggs. So I live down in southern Idaho, the further part of southern Idaho, I should say. I know a lot of people up north, you think southern Idaho, you think Boise. Well, for those of us in Boise, I mean, Boise is more north than we are down here in like the Idaho Falls area, but we're in like the southeast corner of the state. So we decided I had a couple options. I could have went to Boise and covered the one in Boise. It would have been more complicated because my son had a soccer tournament, and it's his first tournament back since he's been injured, and he's still got some health concerns that we don't quite have an answer to, and so I wanted to be there, obviously, to kind of watch and monitor him. And so he had that tournament this weekend, and so when we looked at the No Kings list of cities where they were going to be protesting, we were kind of going, okay, Driggs is an hour away, and he ended up actually not having to play on Saturday because they didn't make it to the championship, and so I could have, I guess, left, late on. He had a game at 8 o'clock in the night on Friday, and so we just decided let's just go to the No Kings protest in Driggs, And then the Idaho Falls one started at 4. The Driggs one started at 10 a.m. on Saturday. And so we could kind of go do that one, come back, rest for a little bit, and then go to the Idaho Falls one. We could have also probably skipped Driggs and went down to Pocatello instead. And I haven't actually seen any numbers from Pocatello. So if you guys have some numbers from Pocatello on how many people went to the No Kings protests, let me know, because I actually don't have an answer for that. So we went down to, or went up to Driggs, is probably a more accurate term. Went up to Driggs, and I didn't know how many people were going to show up. Driggs, I think, has a couple thousand people in it, but it's also it's a tourist town, and a lot of people, from my understanding, have started moving to Driggs that couldn't find a place in Jackson Hole, or Jackson Hole was a little bit too expensive, and so they've kind of gone over the border, went to Driggs, and it's quickly becoming another tourist type town. It's a really pretty town, small town, but there was, I don't know, between 300 and 400 people probably that showed up for that protest, which was more than I was thinking was going to be there. But uh, again, maybe it's become a lot more liberal over the last number of years, and so that was to be expected. But that's a sizable chunk of the town if they were all from the town. I did talk to one lady who was from North Carolina. She was from out of town, I think, visiting some folks. So it was warm. It was very, very hot. At least it felt that way as we were walking around talking to people. Somebody said, why are there so many, older people that were at a lot of these rallies? And I don't know that I have an answer for you necessarily, because it was kind of strange. And maybe at first I thought, well, it's Driggs, it's more becoming more of a retirement area. Again, all these people that can't go to Jackson Hole, maybe they're just ended up in Driggs and retiring in Driggs. I don't really know. But I would say a sizable chunk of the population that that was at the protest, I should say, did seem on the older side, which was kind of interesting because I've covered a number of protests. I remember I was on the ground during the BLM protests in Boise, and far more of the younger generation were doing the George Floyd protests in Idaho. And so, and I would say the other protests that I've covered in Idaho at more liberal leaning events typically have younger people. When I go to conservative Republican type events, you'll tend to see an older population. So it was kind of strange to see an older population at a more liberal event. And somebody I think joked that all the hippies from the '60s are still around and doing their thing. I don't know. That was kind of my observation of the demographic that was there, and I wasn't super focused on that. So you could probably go back through the videos. And by the way, so Facebook has this unfortunate feature that now live videos, which is where we did these No Kings protests from, was from there. The live videos delete after 30 days. And so what we did was I downloaded them from Facebook, and they're now on here on Rumble and also on YouTube. So you can find them on either of those platforms. So if you're not subscribed to those platforms, I highly recommend it. That's where you'll be able to watch videos that are live streamed on Facebook, and that way you can still have access to them. So, and by the way, if you do support the work that we're doing, we're trying to reach out to as many people as possible and reach as many Idahoans as possible. But please be sure to support the Idaho Dispatch. Up the link here, scrolling above there, is idahodispatch.com/support. We'd love to have you guys on board. So the Driggs protest, my phone actually ended up overheating sometime. I don't know, I'd maybe gone 20 minutes or so, and it overheated pretty quick. And so we kind of took a break, went and cooled down in the car, and then went back. And then we went to the opposite side of where we were because those buildings were providing shade, which is probably why a lot of the people ended up over on that side, just because they wanted to be in the shade. So we go over there. And again, we were trying to take pictures of signs or videos of signs. We were trying to talk to some people and just kind of understand, or I guess let them air their grievance and try to explain why they were there protesting. And we ran into some people who were very kind and nice and talked to us. And obviously, if they know you're a conservative, then they'll a lot of times not talk to you. I don't know that it's necessarily that way for everyone, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But it was clear, I think, and maybe when you're talking to people who are from maybe the older crowd, they're more willing to just have a discussion with you about whatever the issue is, versus some of the younger crowd who tends to, I guess, I don't know, not want to discuss anything with anyone who is not a far leftist, for lack of a better phrase. So we talked to this gal, for instance, and it was interesting because you could see here she's facing the street. And when I went up, and I don't remember exactly how I started in the video and all that kind of stuff, but I was asking about her sign and all, and what's kind of the purpose of it. And so she's talking and she's watching the crowd, and she's not turned around and looking at me. And I was kind of off here to the side of her because this is a still shot from the video, and so I was off to the side of this girl, and kind of behind, and just asking her questions, and she's talking and she's talking, and all of a sudden she turns and she sees Idaho Dispatch on my polo, and then immediately stops. And it's like, "Oh, you're an agitator." I was like, interesting. Number one, that you were totally fine having a conversation and explaining your outfit, immediately followed by, oh, you're an agitator because it says Idaho Dispatch. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people, because of the name, oftentimes think that some sort of law enforcement thing, rather than, a throwback to the old dispatch writers, delivering news and all that kind of stuff. And so she immediately was, "You're an agitator." "No, you're an agitator. You're a, whatever." And I just kind of laughed because I'm like, well, wait a minute. I was having a nice, polite conversation, asking nice questions, and yet you have the sign that literally says "off with their heads." Do you mean that deliberately? Are you saying the president should be executed? Like, I don't know. I don't know what your intentions are with your sign. That's why I was trying to ask some questions to figure out if you're just, a throwback to the old French Revolution, and that's all. And on the other side of her sign, by the way, it says "Let them eat cake." Okay, so I understand who she's trying to portray, with Marie Antoinette. But, uh, again, you have a sign that says "off with their heads," which some people may consider to be agitating, or pushing a form of violence. I'm not necessarily going to say that, but you can understand why someone might possibly think that. So we talked to her. We talked to a number of other people. I asked a few folks that we talked to about the whole king issue. If you don't want a king, you do know that kings don't allow their subjects to go out and protest against them. That would be something you couldn't do. And I think some people at these protests literally think he's trying to be king, and some it's just a metaphor for, we think he's doing too much by himself and not being reined in by Congress. So that was kind of the Driggs protest. There were on four. There's one main street really in Driggs, and there might only be one traffic light that I can remember in Driggs. And so they took up all four corners. I didn't see any counter protesters in Driggs. There were a few times where we got coal rolled, and if you don't know what that means, just YouTube coal rolling, and you'll figure it out real quick. That happened a couple of times. So then we went down to Idaho Falls at 4 o'clock, and same thing. This was over on the Friendship, or near the Japanese Friendship Garden. Nobody was really down in the garden, but they were all on the bridge that went across Broadway there, and on both sides of the street. And I don't know how many people there. Quite a few. I would say at least double whatever was in Driggs, probably more. So 800 to 1,000, maybe. I mean, there's quite a few, and I don't, and maybe some of the people in Idaho Falls one left. So we again went and talked to a number of folks, including this young woman who told us she was an alien from Mars. And I asked her, I said, "Are you just trying to say, like, you're an illegal alien and you're here?" And she goes, "Well, sure that, but I also just wanted to dress up." And it took her apparently 8 hours to dress up in this costume and put all the paint on. So She was nice, but very, very interesting characters. We actually talked to another gal who she was a Hispanic gal and she had a Mexican flag, draped over her shoulders. And we talked to her about the immigration issue. We were having a conversation. It was a nice conversation about what her proposal was to solve the immigration issue. And she said she doesn't want an open border, but there needs to be more transparency in how the process works, and so on and so forth. And maybe some things that both sides could agree to, depending on who you are. But it was interesting because as I'm talking to her and live streaming, a gal came up, and I'm pretty sure she works for the Bonneville Democrats. And she came up and said, he's very much a Republican. And it was funny because the gal I was talking to, even at least from my recollection from it happening live and in real time, was kind of like, okay. She didn't seem to care. She just wanted to have the conversation. She wanted to talk or whatever. But that's, to me, was interesting that she was trying to basically tell her, don't talk to this guy, even though we had I think, a good conversation about the issue. I would talk to another couple, kind of ask them some of the same stuff. And it was interesting because as I'm talking to this couple, I asked them about how Kamala Harris became the nominee for the Democrat Party. And I said, she didn't get a single vote. She literally was appointed as the nominee when Biden stepped down. So she didn't go through, on top of, it seems that all sides appear to agree that Joe Biden was in significant cognitive decline and that it had been happening for a while and got covered up. That's what a lot of even liberals and especially liberals in the media seemed to know, that was the case, and nobody wanted to talk about it at the time. And now everybody seems to admit that was the case. And I said, so you want to talk about not having a king, and yet she was appointed and never got a single vote as the nominee, of course. And another guy chimed in and was like, we didn't want that, and that wasn't good. And so anyway, it was a lot of interesting conversations that we had at the Idaho Falls protest as well. Neil Larson from KID Radio was down there live streaming as well. And then we went to, after the Idaho Falls protests, there was a counter demonstration to the No Kings protest, so to speak. And these weren't people that want kings. These were people that, the No Kings protest was an anti-Trump demonstration, right? I think most people would agree that was the primary purpose, was to protest Trump. So these were pro-Trump supporters that didn't do the counter protest near the No Kings protest, and they had maybe some safety concerns, or they didn't want to have some conflict there, and so they ended up going to the Walmart in Ammon, which is basically a suburb. Like, if you didn't know where Ammon and Idaho Falls stopped and ended, you would have no clue just driving down 25th or whatever. It just kind of eventually merges into Ammon. Anyway, so there's a Walmart in Ammon. They did a counter protest there. When we got there, I think there was only 6 or 7 people. They said their number was about 15 at the most at the counter demonstration. They did tell me, though, and maybe we should have went to the counter demonstration first, because there was allegedly, okay, I'm going to say allegedly, a young woman. This young woman here came up and started taking pictures of the counter demonstrators, and so they pulled out a picture, or their camera started taking pictures of her. Well, she left. And one of the guys that was there said he was holding a sign that said, support ICE, I think is what he told me. I'd have to go back and watch the video to double check. And that the gal came and ripped the sign out of his hand and then took off. So that was, the only, I don't know what the right word is here, I guess more hitting interaction that happened with regard to the protest that day was this gal allegedly came and ripped a sign out of a guy's hand. That was at the counter demonstration. So overall, again, interesting, I guess, feedback talking to some of these folks who, again, they definitely don't like Trump. They think that the big beautiful bill is bad. They don't like how the immigration issue is being handled. And it was kind of interesting because I did talk to one gal and I said, well, Trump now seems to be saying, oh, wait a minute here. Maybe the farmers and some of these other industries need the immigrants who are here illegally. And he seems to be walking back on the tougher, you know, deportation policy. What do you think about that? Well, yeah, that's good that he recognized his mistake, and now we can, do that. But I don't think it would matter. I don't think there's much that Trump could do that would cause most of these people to come and support him. So I didn't get to go to the Boise one. I did see some pictures. It looked like a pretty big turnout. I don't know. I saw various crowd estimates ranging from 4 to 6,000. It was quite a few people. I didn't go there. There was pictures. I guess the communists had set up a table at the Boise No Kings protest, which is kind of interesting. Centralized government. I'm not sure that that's anyway kind of a weird thing to be at a No Kings protest, and then you have a communist thing, which is not much different than just having a king basically run everything. So, but that was kind of interesting. Some really interesting booths. Nampa had a decent sized protest from what I hear. They did theirs a little bit later than Boise. So if you guys were in any of those protests or counter protests or whatever, be sure to let us know in the comments. Anyway, this has been the second episode of Dispatch Direct. I wanted to just start doing some video podcasting and talking about some of these stories that sometimes people prefer to watch or listen to something like this versus reading news articles. But either way, we'll put it all together, and you guys can just take whatever you want. We're just trying to get you as much information as we possibly can. So with that, if you guys have anything else, be sure to give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments if you have any questions, comments, concerns, etc. We appreciate you guys tuning in. And until next time, take care. God bless.